Hey everybody, thank you for joining us today. My name is Zachary Deptawa. I'm a cloud advocate with Microsoft, and I'm joined by Cody de Arkland. Did I say that right, Cody?
You were close enough. It's D Arkland, but
De
it's all
Arkland.
good.
Sorry about that. Sorry about
That's
that.
all right.
So, like I said, I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft, and Cody's going to be talking about console and HCS today. Cody, why don't you give us a little bit of information about yourself?
Sure, yeah. So again, my name's Cody Arkland. I do technical marketing over at Hashicorp, and I represent console, but I tend to stay pretty close to like our application story more than anything, like talking about how we make applications easy to use. I think that the funny thing when you think about all the stuff that we do, things like Terraform, things like console. We're going to talk today about HCS. Like really, at the end of the day, like it's all about like people and their applications and how they actually consume these applications, right? Like people aren't provisioning Terraform just because it looks cool, right? Like they're doing it to build applications and kind of solve problems. So pretty passionate about that space. But that's me in a nutshell. So so tell me a little bit about your role. Like what is Zach the Cloud Advocate do at Microsoft?
Sure, sure. I am a cloud advocate at Microsoft, and so I basically, like, long story short, I am to empower the hearts and minds of developers and operations engineers, and I'm basically elbow to elbow, shoulder to shoulder on the front lines in documentation and in demos, and actually using this technology. And Cody, we've it looks like we have a little bit of a technical hiccup on your video. I don't know if you want to restart it.
Oh, did it drop out or?
It just looks like maybe we have a bad connection. A little bit. It looks like it's just not responding.
Let me refresh.
It might be. It just might be the connection between us, and if so, we can redo that. There you go. That looks better.
Cool. All right. Sorry about that.
No, no, that's okay. That's okay. It's we're doing this completely live. This is not a webinar or presentation. We're basically going to be hanging out and chatting. Actually, Cody, can you zoom your share a little bit as well?
Oh yeah, totally.
Okay, and like we said, this is absolutely live. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. I'll work to answer them as best I can. If Cody's speaking and Cody can help as well, we're just gonna basically chat, hang out, talk about this technology, and see how we can use it. So the last live stream that we did, it was actually Mishra and I from Hashicorp doing talking about not HCS console, and how you can use that with AKS, how you can do blue-green deployments, how you can do basically split that load. And so, what are we going to talk about today, Cody?
Yeah, so in the previous stream, you guys talked about kind of running your own console cluster and doing these like patterns when you're actually running your own. But something we did really cool as of recent was launch the HCS service, the Hashicorp console service on Azure. So what this is basically like a managed console instance, and what it lets you do is consume console like any other cloud service, right? So it's it's fun to be able to build your own stuff and to tinker, but a lot of times when you're taking something into production, you want something that's just managed, and you don't have to worry about how like the care and feeding and the like low level operations of it. So HCS lives in Azure. It's a native catalog item. We can deploy it from within, and I'll show a little bit about that in kind of the live stream here. But yeah, we'll be talking about HCS and kind of how easy it is to get up and running, and like something like AKS as an example with HCS.
Gotcha, gotcha. And so I'm getting choppy audio again. Let's do this. I'm gonna hang up on Discord and I'll call you right back.
Sounds good.
Just to try and see if we can get a better connection. Hang on 1 second.
Yep.
All right, let's see if hopefully we've got a little bit better connection there. We could hear you, it was just a little bit choppy, but your video had paused there, so I figured we'd try this.
All right.
Looks good so far.
Let's see if we're back in business. All right.
Yes.
Yes. Cool. So yeah, we're going to talk about HCS today. Long story short.
Awesome, awesome. So what do you have built so far? I know you were going to look at standing up a cluster.
Yeah, so I have a cluster already up. So you'll see this is actually my HCS environment, or my HCS. This is my Azure environment. So I got a lot of stuff kind of going on in here. We'll jump in first and just take a look at the managed application for HCS.
Okay.
So this is already deployed. We'll go back and I'll show how to deploy this out from scratch in a moment. But we can actually come in here and we can see that this is like a console instance living inside of Azure natively. So I can come into the console UI if I want to directly from here and work with the platform directly. So
Awesome.
if I go back, we can create a new resource. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So, in terms of HCS versus console, just for those that don't know, so HCS is a marketplace item on Microsoft Azure. But what are some of the differences, Cody?
Yeah, so there's, we try to keep it pretty close in parity. One thing that's missing, like if you go with things that like aren't consistent right now, is like federation. So if you wanted to be able to connect HCS to like an external cloud or something like that, and have like those two console clusters federate with each other, that's not there today, just because of the complexities of running this as a managed service. That functionality is coming as planned. It's kind of actively being worked on. But other than that, it's pretty much the same thing. And kind of throughout the stream, we'll go through and we'll set it up, and I'll show that it's a functional console cluster, right? We can use things like ingress gateways to access resources. We get that secure communication by default between services. It's a console environment at the end of the day. It's just managed as opposed to being something that's stood up by you and managed by you. So we handle upgrades, we handle making sure it's running right, so that we have an SRE team that monitors the service and makes sure that everything's kind of up and running good.
Right on. So it's basically you guys do the heavy lifting, and basically you're managing it for the user.
Yep. I think what's kind of what's cool about it being like living within Azure and like being a managed service is like you can use things like Terraform to manage it as well. But like that all is like operational story, kind of to your point, like we're doing the heavy lifting around keeping this up and running, like the things that you can't easily like automate, things like server upgrade as an example, that's all handled by us. If you lose a node, that's handled by us and replaced by us. Like it's all of the heavy lifting, the boring administrative stuff is all handled by Hashicorp.
Awesome. So what are we going to look at today in terms of the demo? I know you had something you wanted to show.
Yeah, so let's get started by just taking a look at how the catalog items provisioned out. We'll talk through a couple of the steps there, and then what we'll do is we'll jump into the HCS CLI. What I love about the HCS CLI is that it like makes a lot of, it's actually like easier to get console up and running inside of HCS than probably anywhere else right now. Because of this CLI that will literally give you kind of the entire configuration that you need to deploy this into an environment. So we'll hang out in the UI for a few minutes, go through and take a look at the catalog item, and then we'll jump into the CLI and start kind of pulling some configurations down and taking a look at how this actually is used kind of in practical use.
Awesome. Okay, and we're getting we're back to like the robotic kind of audio a little bit, and I don't know how best. It looks like it might be cleaning up right now, but we'll just continue and see how it plays out.
Yeah, what I'll do real quick is I'll switch on to make sure that like I'm on actual hardline. I don't think that that's the problem, but we'll give it a shot.
No, I think it has to do with Discord. The technology today is failing us. So there's a question in chat really quickly. I assume you don't control this, but is there any work on adding Hashicorp services to the Azure pricing calculator? So the way that the marketplace items work is the pricing and all of that is handled by the third party that is running that service, that is managing that service, and that is likely why you don't see it in the Azure pricing calculator. I don't know that there's any way to request that, but I can look into it for sure.
Yeah, that one unfortunately it's far outside of my scope of control.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's take a look in the actual catalog item. So when we come in and we want to provision out this cluster, this is what the screen effectively looks like. I might have a couple of more options because I'm special, but generally this is what it's going to look like. So we have this on-demand version that will run just kind of on-demand cluster, bill you per hour, I believe, and then the annual one where you can actually like kind of prepay and set up this larger subscription. So that's a little bit of like a more consumption detail, not necessarily like a functionality story. But if we jump in here, we can see the actual configurations for this cluster. I can come in, I can choose what resource group it goes into. I can set up some information around, me as like the owner. This is one that I really wanted to call out, though, is this idea of production clusters versus development clusters. Really cool. We can actually deploy out a development cluster that just gives you kind of a single node console environment. And you get all of the functionality of console, but without kind of the redundancy, which is obviously a trade-off, right? But what's really cool about it is that the price is so much more reduced to use the developer version. So you can come in and build against this, try it out, take it for a spin, and do that in like a really low cost way, like a very, very low cost way. And you get, like I said, the same functionality that we get out of like a normal 3-node environment. You're just losing out on the redundancy aspects of it. So that's one that I really wanted to make it a point to call out here. We'll fill out some just basic info in here real quick, mostly just to get to the next screen. We're not actually going to go and provision this because I already have one set up that we can use.
Awesome. So the development, you don't want to use that in production, obviously, but it's really good for testing or for getting your feet wet with the service. Is that a good?
Yeah, totally. It's really what it's designed for.
Awesome.
Cool. We take a look here. We can see some of the actual console configurations. We can choose to name our cluster, right? So set up whatever name we want for the cluster. It's just a friendly name, like a configured name for the environment. We can choose our data center name. So you'll see when I bring up the actual console instance in a little bit here, mine's just Azure HCS, but you can name it kind of whatever you want there. We can provision out different versions of console. So if you needed to be like on a specific version, we can do that as like new versions come out. So as we roll out, the future versions of console, they'll pop up in here as well. This one's an interesting one to call out. We always recommend like going in with the external endpoint disabled. So what that does is doesn't give you a load balancer on the edge, doesn't expose the UI externally. And we recommend that because you don't necessarily want your kind of console UI just hanging out in the open, right? You want to be able to kind of lock that down behind the walls of Azure, and then you'd use like a Bastion host or something like that to interact with it. My preference is to use like Terraform. So we use like Terraform and the private runners as an example. Like they're in like Terraform Cloud for Business to connect in and actually manage this environment in kind of a infrastructure as code way. But call out here is generally we recommend disabled for security. But if I flip this to enabled, I can access my UI externally. I could pass it to you, Zach, and give you an ACL token, and you'd be able to cruise in and work inside of Azure or work inside of console as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, so it's kind of like the best practice that's seen across the industry with like not exposing things that you don't need to expose, like in making sure you don't have endpoints that you don't need, if that makes sense.
Exactly. This one's important too because we do end up peering these VNets that are deployed. So as HCS deploys, it deploys a managed resource group, and then within that it deploys out its own managed networks and whatnot. So we do need to set up a VNet and we need to peer into it. My caution for everybody would be watch out for overlapping ranges, right? When you're peering these, so this is more of like an Azure thing. When you're peering these different networks, you can't overlap with each other to peer. So like if you have a managed resource group that's created in like the separate entity, and then you have ones inside of your own resource group, those can obviously be overlapping because from like a routing standpoint, those are completely separate within the Azure infrastructure. But when you peer them, they're going to get very confused, and Azure is going to bonk at you and say, hey, you can't peer overlapping networks with each other. So be cautious with this when you're provisioning out like your AKS clusters as an example. Make sure that you're not setting up like an overlapping IP range, because that's going to get really messy, and you're going to spend 40 minutes deploying an AKS cluster, tearing it down and redeploying it with a new IP range. So just cautionary tale, watch out for that.
Yeah, no, that makes totally sense. It makes total sense, and that's a problem really with most peering is the overlap. But yeah, no, it is definitely a problem. You want to make sure that you've got different networks that you're peering there.
So assuming we use the magic of space-time and I hit submit and it went out and provisioned, this is what you end up with, right? I showed this at the beginning, kind of this HCS environment. If I go into the UI, we can see the integrated UI here within the environment. There's a couple of leftover artifacts in here from when I was doing previous demos. So if I go into like my intentions, you can see the intentions that are in here. It's important to note that console and HCS deploys as like secure by default. And what does that mean? What that means is ACLs are enabled. So ACLs are basically like a way to authenticate against console. There's a version of services that use ACLs. So you use ACLs to tell like a service that can talk to console. But then for you and me perspective, there's ACLs as well that I could create an ACL token, hand it to you, and I could give you access to, for example, just for fun, I could create Zach's namespace here, create a policy that maps to that, hand you the token, and when you came in, all you'd be able to access is Zach's namespace. So that's ACLs at a high level. That being said, a lot of people are used to not running it with ACLs, which is not recommended. A lot of people run without them. So they come in, they hit HCX for the first time, and they're hit with this logon prompt saying, hey, give me your ACL token to get in. They get a little bit confused. So just another cautionary tale, ACLs are enabled by default. We made it very easy to bootstrap that, though, and we're about to cruise into that section of this where we look at some of the commands. We have this really powerful extension for the Azure CLI that kind of bolts right in. It ends up being a set of commands that let you kind of remotely bootstrap this stuff, pull out configs for things like the Terraform, things like the EK or AKS configuration. Right from the command line. So that's how you get the token the first time, because when you deploy the cluster, it's not bootstrapped yet with the token. So you use that command line to bootstrap it out. You get your token back, and then you can start working with the console right away.
Gotcha. And this is not unique to HCS, right? This is also in console, like console, the open source console.
Correct. Now ACLs aren't enabled by default on on-prem consoles. So if you grab console, you spin it up on a server, by default it's not there. You have to turn it on. But in the managed offering, we do that by default. And the idea being, we want it secure from day one. We don't want somebody to come in, set up their service mesh, and have it in an insecure fashion, and then end up like kind of shooting themselves in the foot, right? So we set it up as secure by default so that it's production ready. Even the developer instance is set up with ACLs enabled by default, because we want it kind of ready to protect your data. We don't want somebody getting in and being able to remove your intentions or add intentions to services that you didn't want authorized, or register new services. That's the greater concern, is somebody registering another service with your console environment, and then they're inside of your mesh, right? So with the ACLs enabled, we have a way to stop that from happening. They need an ACL token to be able to register services inside of the environment. So
yeah, it makes total sense. It's good to err on that side, right? Of kind of like least privilege. You're having to poke the holes, if that makes sense.
Exactly. A couple other like cool pro tips. We can come into like the property screen and get more details around the actual deployment, so we can get things like the resource ID and whatnot from in here as well. We can dig into parameters and outputs, and we can see actual information that can be pulled out, via the API, for example. We can also see the external URL here. So if I wanted to actually hit this outside of the Azure portal, I can do that as well.
Nice.
So I've already logged in, so it didn't prompt me. Obviously, my key is kind of cached in there. But if you came into this, it would be a different story entirely.
Gotcha. And that's,
so we've got nothing. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry about that. The console, just to differentiate for anybody who's watching, the standard, I say standard, but the open source console, it also has this interface as well, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So you see, I'm actually running the developer version, because I have just one lonely little instance in here running in Azure. If I go into nodes, we can see just one little node hanging out in here.
Yeah.
So why don't we get in and have some fun command line style? How's that sound?
Yes, I love command line. My whole background is Linux, so.
Oh, nice. All right, so I'm gonna pull this over onto the screen. We're gonna hope that nothing breaks.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I have a Terraform manifest in here that I was working with. This is I'm doing a webinar later on using Terraform Cloud with HCS. So this is a double hitter day of HCS stuff. Excuse me. So we're not going to work on the Terraform side of it too much today. But what we are going to do is we're going to play with the Azure HCS commands. I bump this up a little bit just to get us a little bit better size. There we go. So we can see a bunch of different commands that are available here. If I do an AZ HCS git config, against my resource group and the name of my deployment, which is HCS. I can hit enter here. And this will actually, when I talked about making it super easy to get started, this automatically dumps out the configs right here. So I can use these. So Mishra, and you did the secure connectivity kind of story.
Yes.
This is how I would bring things like virtual machines in, right? Now I have the cert, and so if I do a cat on the CA, we can see I have my cert. And likewise, if I do a cat on the console JSON, I have the configs here, right? So like these are the configs that you would drop onto like Azure VM to be able to join that into the mesh as well. Another pro tip, I use these configs alongside Packer. So every time I deploy an HCS cluster, and honestly, even if I do like an on-prem open source console, I'll use Packer to build an image that is kind of pre-baked for console effectively. So it has the agents running on it. It's got the config files. And what I do is I use the Ansible Provisioner inside of Packer to do the full configuration. What that lets me do is then whenever I do like a Terraform manifest for some virtual machines and I deploy them, they get joined to HCS right away. So
Nice.
pro tip, like get friendly with Packer. It makes building these images like a million times easier. You can orchestrate a lot of complexity in there and make it very easy to accomplish. And furthermore, you have like then a kind of an application as code definition for the running state of your virtual machine too, which I think is pretty cool. But yeah, I will use these configs alongside a virtual machine. In other console environments, you would kind of decompose these out and build kind of a manual secrets file, which is a little painful for if you want to bring an AKS cluster in, so Azure Kubernetes cluster. In HCS, however, we have that command line that I was just showing that will actually do the secret configuration for you, which is super slick.
Nice. And so you pulled those configs there through the AZ CLI. Yeah, that's awesome. This is we do this with other CLI commands as well, like the AKS cluster. You can actually pull context and configs down. But this is the first time I've seen it for HCS.
So you haven't even seen the cool stuff yet. The cool stuff is yet to come.
Nice.
So just to get config, that create token, you'll start. I'm not going to run it again, just because it'll just boot another token. Actually, might end up running that again now that I think about it, just to get ourselves another one. But the generate Kubernetes secret, that one we definitely will do. So we'll do AZ HCS generate Kubernetes secret. Link off that PB copy there. A lot of text on the screen. What's really cool about this is that this is the configuration from a secrets perspective for HCS. So if I one way to do this, instead of doing this into kube control apply, I can apply that directly to my cluster, and the secret's already configured. So all that stuff that was in that config file that I was talking about previously, that's all right here. I don't have to worry about like decomposing that myself. The HCS CLI just does it for you, which I think is wicked cool.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That saves a ton of time.
And the same thing applies for this fellow right here. So AZHCS generate helm. I can point at my AKS cluster. So my AKS cluster is consulcates. The HCS environment is HCS, aptly named, and my resource group. If I hit enter on this, it's going to spit out my Helm chart, the Helm chart that I would use to build this out. Right, so you can see my Bootstrap tokens in there, my HCS tokens in there, or my HCS secrets in there, the various endpoints that I would need to connect with in order to set this up. All of those are already set up in here, which I think it just makes the barrier to entry super low, and we can actually send this out, for example, into a config. For some reason it's crunching my window there. There we go. K9s. That's not what I was looking for. There we go. I can send this out to the config.yaml file. And we can see all of that there.
That's awesome.
So we do the same thing, for example, with the Azure HCS generate. What was it? There it is. We can dump that out to a local secret file as well, right? So then we can actually see that kind of with some better formatting, a little bit better looking on the screen, not by much though.
Yeah. Any wall of text.
Right. So the good thing is I already set this up before, right? Obviously, this was an environment that I used for demos previously. So if I do a cube control get secrets, it would already be in there. So we could actually list out all the secrets that I had already provisioned inside of the environment. So I don't necessarily need to worry about that too much now. Double check this. Yep. So we have the HCS bootstrap token and the HCS. So if I come in here and do a cube control describe secret. Oops. There we go. We can actually see that token is already set here with as a value. So those secrets are already set up. I don't have to apply them again. I more so wanted to take you through the flow of the CLI. So like thinking about this from the ground floor, you provision your cluster in the Azure portal, right? So you get your cluster in hand, and you want to start bringing services into it. You provision out your AKS cluster, so you're good to go on that front. And from there, use the Azure CLI to generate your Bootstrap token, generate your secret file, generate your Helm file, apply those to the Cube cluster, and then Helm install console, and you're off to the races.
That's awesome. It really simplifies that process of I just love when there's like little shortcuts like this.
Totally.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and have some fun with this. We'll do the Helm install console. We'll feed in that config file that we have locally. We'll call it Hashicorp console. And we're gonna hope that this doesn't fail live for us.
It's one of those things doing it live, right? That I mean, we've seen that today several times so far.
I was gonna say, if today is any indicator, this is not gonna go well. So I'll bring up another tab and we'll take a look and we'll see what happens here. Console's coming up. It's not too upset yet. So
nice.
Make
That's
this
good.
a little bit bigger first because that's really small. So we'll do a cube control watch. We'll watch these come online. Everything's running happy, man. We're cooking with fire. We're doing all right.
Awesome.
One thing that's missing though, that is something I'll want to solve momentarily here, is we don't have our ingress gateway up. So we can expose things in like a kube native way, right? As you know, like we can just set up a load balancer behind like front end service and connect to it, and that's kind of all fine and dandy. But there's benefits and losses to that. One of the benefits of console being like a service mesh is the ability to like modify traffic flow. And I think you and Mishra did some of this on your first session where you did some like splitting scenarios between environments, right? So you think about like logical places when you think of app architecture where you would want to be able to control the flow of traffic. And for me, I don't always want to control flow to like a backend, like a database. Like I might want to if I have like replication in place and I want to be able to like very fine-grained control where that's going. But I almost always default to like API tiers and front ends, because like as you design a new front end, you don't necessarily want to go to like call up ops and say, hey, .11 is offline now, we're moving to .12. Can you swap the load balancer around? Can you flip DNS? You have to wait for TTLs to expire. It's not a very smooth process. So like splitting at front end when services are coming inbound, but then also splitting at like API tiers. So when API v2 comes out, or they add new routes, new methods, so on and so forth, you want to be able to like introduce those services as well. The ingress gateway gives you a really cool logical point to apply that splitting. And like there's great API gateway vendors out there. Like, so it's not a competitive call.
Yeah.
But when you look at ways to kind of consume console in the best way possible, being able to have something that's like service mesh integrated at the beginning all the way through is pretty powerful. And like when it's the ingress gateway is built into console, it's part of console, you can apply attentions to the communication. So you can say different versions of the front end are visible from the ingress gateway. We're doing some crazy stuff around intentions that are really cool that are going to come out at Hashicomp and we're going to talk about. That'll be like very relevant to this conversation right now that I can't touch on right now. But like there's a lot of reasons why applying traffic policy at your front end makes a lot of sense, and using the ingress gateway lets us do that.
Yeah, and
it's. Oh, go ahead. You're good.
no, yeah, I just wanted to say the first webinar, if I'm not mistaken, is still up, where people can go see it if they'd like to. I don't have a link to it handy, but I was impressed how just instant the intentions changes that Mishra was making were happening. It was absolutely instant. Um, and I couldn't believe there was literally I don't know that there was any delay from the changes to how the traffic was being routed. He had a console open where you could see that it was hitting it over and over, and it literally right after he set the intention change, it changed where it was going. It was amazing how fast it was.
The thing is, like, one of my favorite demos to do is I'll do like a while loop, so you can actually see like an example of it here. I'll do a while loop against a service, and I'll apply a traffic shifting policy. And we're going a little bit off track here, or a little bit off script here, so I can't like do this demo right this
Sure.
moment. But I'll do the demo, and then I'll apply a traffic splitting policy. And you can literally watch immediately that traffic start going to like the backend service. And if you do like a 90-10 split, you can literally watch it like every so often. It'll hit the new one, and as you bump it up, it'll gradually. Like, it's simple math at that point. Like as you go to 50-50, it's going to split between the two, but you never see it drop, and it's immediate, right? Like so, you're getting that immediate. And we call this like this concept of progressive delivery. This guy James Governor at Redmond kind of pioneered this concept, and like it really resonated with us around the way we talk about delivering applications, and like this idea of being able to control like your blast radius, being able to like very quickly change the flow of traffic to enable more or reduce back. And like when you have that instant response to something like an intention as well as traffic policy, like that's kind of the gold standard of application lifecycle, right? Being able to very easily say like I'm sending 10% of traffic here, I'm sending 1% of traffic here. If it's like a large enough service that's being hit by 10,000 people, you're going to notice that 1% of traffic.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I come from the dedicated hosting world, and so like working in F5 load balancers and things like that, and even knowing when you recycle pools, like it's not as instant as what I haven't played with them recently, but the demo that Mishra did was just, I mean, it was just simple, but it was amazing to see how fast.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool thing.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to step there.
No, you're good. You're good. I was actually grabbing another directory that I have where we can do some other interesting demos out of as well. So
nice.
So cool. This is up and running now. Again, if we switch back into console here, we'll see all the services up. A quick little tour of the UI. If I go into front end, we can see the service here. If I hit proxy info, I can see the upstream here. So that's all working. And you can see like this was a very quick getting started process. Like it would have taken me like about 30-45 minutes for HCS to deploy, but bringing in this cluster wasn't challenging, and it's something that can be done very easily. And like it really shifts console to being this platform that you have to like care and feed and manage into being managed, and you're just a consumer using it. It's like if you're a developer inside of my organization and you want to be able to like participate in the service mesh, and I'll explain what that means in a moment. It's very easy for you to bring your cluster into this environment and be consistent inside of that environment. And that's kind of like when we talk about console and like the things we want, the way we want people to use consoles, we want people to have that global service mesh. I think that like the service mesh pattern has been really interesting because somehow we ended in this place where we championed this idea of a service mesh, but it ended up being all of these islands of service mesh, right? Where like you would deploy your AKS cluster and you'd install your service mesh on it. And for your little island, it was the best mesh that could ever be. But as far as my island next door to you, like we didn't have a way to communicate across that mesh. We were going out over traditional networking and kind of hopes and prayers that it was going to connect across those environments. So when we talk about like service mesh for us, we want that to be global. We want you, me, whoever else is on the stream right now to all be building out our console environments and joining them to the same control plane. And you get a lot out of it. You get that intention model where you get, like you talked about before, being able to control the flow, both from an allow and disallow perspective. Some of the really cool things we're doing with intentions in the next release, again, Hashicomp is a week away, so I got to be careful.
Yeah.
But like being able to use those capabilities across multiple clusters is just incredibly powerful. And I think that like that's, if I had one criticism of the service mesh market, is that we've gotten to a place where we've treated it as an island. And I think that it's use cases, right? Some people need it to be an island, but it definitely shouldn't always be an island. And I personally feel like that's kind of what it's become, is that somehow became standard operating procedure for everybody to manage these things themselves, independent from the rest of the environment, and you lose a lot of the efficiencies of a service mesh going down that path.
Yeah, for sure. And that's something that I've learned when I've messed with console. There was a really cool I don't know if you've seen it, like a Pong demo. Have you seen that demo?
Which demo? Oh,
It,
you say Pong?
yeah, it was like a Pong related demo. And that's one of the like the way that console makes the communication easy, like you said, globally, is just, I don't know, it's just super powerful. It's one of my favorite things about console. And console started as a key value store, didn't it?
Yeah. It's kind of it's kind of funny to think of that. Actually, it didn't start as, now that I'm thinking back. It's a little known fact that the key value store was added sort of at the last minute.
Oh,
It was more so around like the service discovery stuff. The key value store was a last minute add because like it was already doing key value on the back end. So the key value was just added kind of on the fly, so to speak.
that's awesome.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
I
So let's
I recall that. I didn't mean to cut you off there. I just recall the key value being a big piece.
But it's funny, like, and we're gonna bounce off of the service mesh track for a second here. It's really interesting because like when I Cody's definition of console is a platform for making applications easier. Like it sounds very markety to say that, but I actually like very much believe that. And like one of the ways that it makes it easier is like the key value store and something called console template. And this is totally not service mesh stuff, but being able to use the key value store and have console template read from that and apply configuration changes to like workloads inside of the environment is like a super cool thing. It sounds very basic, but like I'll use like a hacky lab example in my lab at home. So I used to work for one of the big cloud vendors, so I still have my lab at home that I tinker with at times, and I run Ansible in my environment, and I actually have my console environment wired up to Ansible. And what I do is when I change like an entry when I want to add something to like my Ansible hosts file, I do that in console, and when I hit submit, consoles takes that data, pushes it into that kind of remote Ansible control host, updates the host file locally, and then runs a command to rerun whatever manifest I applied. So like this idea of being able to kind of apply dynamic configurations to a thing is a super powerful capability of console that like every once in a while you'll see a blog post pop up on Medium where some huge company is doing this at like 10,000 node scale, and it's pretty cool to watch.
That is awesome. Yeah, if you
It's a whole different thing, but yeah.
if send me one of those posts too when you come across them. I just haven't personally seen it, and I love the read stuff like that.
Yeah, it's an interesting model because like if you think about like I said, we're going way off the track of service mesh, which I think is good because like it's about use cases, right? And it's about problems people are trying to solve. These like config management tools, they're the most common model for like config management is you have central host that pushes out configs to remote endpoints, right? And that only scales so far because if you have one control host or one control cluster hitting 10,000 machines, like that's 10,000 outbound connections that have to be managed in some way, shape, or form. And there's some really cool use cases people do with that config management use case where they basically use console to flip that model around. And now those endpoints are calling back to that service for their configs. So they're doing more of a pull as opposed to a push, which at like very high scalability wise has a much higher like scale factor to be able to pull a config down versus asking like one lone one lone service running like on one CPU and 2 gigs of memory to push out to 10,000 machines is a terrifying thing. And it's an over exaggerated example, but I think that it probably happens more often than we'd like. So like it's a really cool use case of console that again it doesn't sell any nodes, but you can totally do it with HCS, right? Like if I had all of my configurations inside of console, and I was pushing these into some of the VMs that lived inside of my Azure environment, like console AZ 1, 2, and 3 here. I can do that too. I've used that to install Nomad, right? So like I don't really fall into the camp of like Kubernetes versus Nomad too much. I think they both have use cases. They both have their stories to tell. So like I'll use I'll use console configuration store to drive installations of Nomad on virtual machines. Like there's really cool tricks you can do.
Yeah, there's so much console can do. And I tell people that all the time is it's many things.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, it's funny because we get in this conversation a lot, and it's, you know, well, every so often we'll talk about console to somebody and they'll be like, oh yeah, I don't need a service mesh right now. And it's like, well, like a service mesh is just one slice of what console does, right? Like it's we live in a buzzword industry, so the service mesh phrase catches ears and people latch onto that. But I think what's really unique about console, I didn't come from an app background. I was a server admin, like racket and cable and servers and doing vSphere environments for the majority of my career. So like the app world isn't necessarily like my native world. I've grown into that, and that's like where I'm passionate about now. And I you know, people's careers have crazy paths, and it worked out that way for me. But what I've always been like passionate about is products that take you on a journey.
Yeah.
I think that like there are a lot of really cool technologies that expect that technology to be the destination, and you as an operator come in, and if you're not ready to be at that destination, it's a bumpy road, right? And I think a lot of service meshes end up being that way, and that's not a slight or a negative against them. I think that for many of the service mesh products, they expect a level of administrative skill or administrative like sophistication that doesn't make it entry level friendly. But console has this very like gradual path excuse me, around like things like service discovery, like this whole concept of, if we pop back into the UI here, this is all based in Cube, but if I go into console and I do an a DNS query about api.service.console, I resolve back this IP address.
Yeah.
And that's outside of service mesh. And you think about like what cloud did around creating dynamic environments. If I blow away an Azure VM and I reprovision it, am I going to get the same IP again? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
But if I'm registering against console, it's always going to be api.service.console. That service registration file is always going to register. And this is like the service discovery use case that we always talk about. It creates this like dynamic model that says, hey, I don't care what the backend is. I'll just register it as API, and console will handle like that resolution. And alongside that service discovery use case, we can do some like really cool like geolocation things where console will detect like this one is further away than this one, so I'm going to resolve the closest one. And we can tie in health checks to that to fail out services. So if API is hanging on one of them and this console can't post to the API, like a set of data, it's throwing an error on one of them, it'll pull it out of the node. So like you think about the path of people adopting service mesh, it's very rare that somebody would just jump in and be like, hey, I'm service mesh ready, let's go. They're probably going to go from a place of like, hey, I'm running VMs and I got the spreadsheet of IP addresses, and I'm really hoping that the network team keeps my DNS entries equal to what I'm expecting, into something like service discovery in console where it's all kind of linked up and automated, and then from there into service mesh. So
yeah, for sure. And I just want to let everybody know we got about 12 minutes. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask them. And Cody, I didn't know how far we were on the demo, and so I just wanted to give that info.
Yeah, I got the main part of the demo out. I wanted to get through and do a little bit of fun around the ingress gateway stuff, but that was a stretch goal more than anything.
Sure. Yeah, I have to say I'm glad to be away from the spreadsheet days, trying to keep track of servers that I provision manually and IPs that I provision manually. Just glad to be out of that now.
Yeah, it's funny because like that service discovery use case is one that like when I first got into the space and I heard that, I was like, do I really need that? But when I think about like dynamic environments and I think about like the frustrations I've had around like, is this service registering or is this service on DNS? Is this address right? Like, where's my consistency at? If I can say, you know what, I don't care about 10.10.10.9 IP or host name anymore. I just care about what console registers it as. So my lab at home, like going back to that previous example, I have console set up, and all of my like home services, like the fun hacky stuff I do at home, registers against console. I have a DNS forwarder set up that sends anything that's at .service.console to console, so it all gets resolved locally. and like it makes like a dynamic model just really works well when you don't want to care about like the individual nodes anymore. You want to care about the service that's up and running. I think it's an interesting metaphor for people actually care about. Like people don't care about 10, 11, 12, and 13. They care about the web server that those 4 addresses represent. They care about, can I get to my web service, and if one of those nodes stops working, are people going to land there? Am I going to lose customers? Am I going to lose interest in my thing because my web infrastructure isn't resilient or isn't dynamic enough? Service discovery use case in console is wicked powerful.
Yeah, for sure. So we don't have any new questions. Is there anything that's coming up for the Hashicorp? Actually, what date? So everybody knows, what are the dates for the Hashicomp digital event?
Yeah, I think it's the 14th and 15th. If I'm hoping that I'm right on that.
It's hashicomp.com, right?
Yeah.
I'll drop the URL here.
Double check here real quick, because now I'm curious and I want to make sure that I'm right. It's actually the 12th through the 15th. So we have a couple of training days on the 12th and 13th, and then the 14th and 15th are the big days. There's some pretty exciting stuff coming. I have to be so careful, otherwise the comms ninjas will drop out of the ceiling and I'll disappear off the stream. So I have to be careful. There's a lot of really cool stuff. It's going to be a Hashicomp to remember. I'll say that.
Yeah, for sure. It probably wasn't fair to say, hey, what kind of cool stuff can we expect to see?
I think it's totally fair. I mean, Mitchell's been on Twitter sharing out some hints. Armand's been on Twitter sharing out some hints. So if you haven't seen those, I would suggest going and checking out their Twitter. And our events team has just put together such an amazing show. It's going to be a really cool thing to see. I think people are going to be blown away by what happens at Hashicomp this year.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. I love Hashicomp every year.
So we spent a lot of time talking about like console overall, and in the last few minutes, I want to hear about your experiences with kind of the Hashicorp tools. Like where I know we talked before a little bit about like you tend to live more in like Terraform space, but like tell me a little bit of like your story around like the Hashicorp tools. I feel like that would be a cool thing to close out on.
Yeah, sure. So I've worked for a few startups now, and my first work with Hashicorp was actually, I can't even remember the year now, but it was with Packer. And so when you mentioned Packer earlier,
sorry to interrupt you, but like Packer was my first Hashicorp love. That was my first tool as well. So
yeah, no, it's totally cool. You were tugging on my heartstrings with the Packer love, because it just we were basically using it to make golden images at the time, and it worked. It was perfect. Like, it was perfect for what we need. And I've still used it recently to show, you can even build container images with Packer, which is something that people don't know, or many people that I've talked to didn't know. But yeah, I've worked with Packer, and then it moved on to Terraform. I've worked with Vault. I haven't worked as much with Console. Console is the service that I just haven't had much time, and I like to work in a production environment instead of like a demo, because it's always different when you're in production. And this is the one service that right now I don't work in a spot where I can do production console. Everything that I do is demo and code related and blog related. But I still love it. I can still see the power. It kind of makes me have that startup itch even. Like, I just want to work in kind of a scrappy, fast-paced place right now and get to use these tools that I'm demoing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, and I think that, like, to that point, like, I think that console's one of those things that when you have a use case for it, like, getting started and playing with it makes a ton of sense. And it's like, when someone comes in and shows you that cool service discovery use case, then you're like, oh, I see the path. I can do that now. That's when it kind of makes sense too. Or like the service mesh thing. So it's about finding a thing that resonates. And to our previous point, like, it does so much that, like, it's just a matter of figuring out where in that you kind of live.
Yeah, and I've had the other side of the token too, where worked with a separate startup where they wanted to put everything shiny in place. So whatever's new, tape it onto our infrastructure and make it work. And I always caution people, use things that are useful to you. Don't use them because they're new and shiny. But console, if console fits for you, it's something that it's just powerful. It's so powerful.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think we're probably good to wrap up at this point, huh?
Yeah, we've got a few minutes left. If there's anyone on chat that has any questions, please drop them. I'm going to go ahead and close the stream here in just a few. We'll wait just a few seconds. But I want to thank everybody who hung out with us for hanging out and listening to Cody and I chat about console today.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, everyone. It's been a blast. It's always good talking with you, Zach.
Yeah, great talking with you, Cody, as well. All right, I guess we'll close this out. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.